the state laws that indicate when a contractor must pay state-mandated construction wage rates, commonly referred to as prevailing wage, to workers engaged in various occupations related to public works construction. Two recent court decisions involving disputes over whether or not contractors should pay prevailing wages on specific projects have included this statement. As statutes go, Section 1720 is hardly a triumph for the drafter's art. This is truly an area where state law is needed of reform. First, AB 987 will encourage economic growth and job creation in California's private construction industry by restoring an honest definition of public works and actual government construction, and by limiting coverage to actual construction trades work. In recent years, the state legislature has greatly complicated the definition of public works projects, obviously in an effort to stretch the law beyond government work to cover privately owned and privately built construction projects. As a result, numerous kinds of construction projects that reasonable Californians would not consider to be government projects now fall under this state-mandated prevailing wage requirement. Second, AB 987 gives California local governments the right to establish their own prevailing wage policies on their own local projects, and it creates exemptions for certain kinds of construction that bring financial challenges to rural areas, including school construction and hospital seismic retrofits. Currently, the California Division of Labor Statistics and Research in San Francisco almost always determines construction wage rates by tallying up all employer payments included in the union collective bargaining agreements that apply to specific trade or specific region. The geographical regions for the rates are often exclusively broad and do not reflect the local economic conditions. As a result, the state-mandated construction wage rates in many areas, including my home in Bakersfield, are often inflated and compared to the actual market wage in the locality. This bill corrects that problem and will result in a more efficient use of taxpayer dollars. Lastly, AB 987 will relieve regulatory burdens for small business and local governments by increasing the cost threshold for prevailing wage coverage from $1,000 to $100,000. The set $1,000 level has been in place since 1931 and certainly should be increased after 80 years of inflation and changing market conditions. Chair and members, I'm aware that there are few proposals generate more eerie than the reforms of prevailing wage laws. Notice that the bill does not repeal prevailing wage, nor am I advocating for a repeal, but I am perplexed about why the state is maintaining the status quo on a law that is so poorly written and so damaging to rural communities looking to encourage private development and provide infrastructure for their futures. This specific comprehensive proposal is to improve public policy for the good of the people of the state of California.
Witnesses in support.
Kevin Dayton, representing Associated Builders and Contractors of California, were the sponsor of the bill. As Assemblywoman Grove mentioned, two recent court cases have said, as statutes go, Section 1720 is hardly a triumph for the drafter's art. As we went through this bill and looked at each provision in law regarding prevailing wage coverage and prevailing wage calculation, you see numerous inconsistencies, confusing, ambiguous provisions, obviously language tacked on in various ways, terms that don't mean the same thing. The section of law that AB 987 is dealing with is a total mess. We went through this and tried to address some of the problems that our contractors report having problems with. These are problems that often end up at the Department of Industrial Relations for a determination administratively and ultimately end up in the court system. Some of the issues we've dealt with is clarifying that prevailing wage applies to employees who are directly at the site of work, removing the problem about off-site coverage and manufacturing, that's fabrication or prefabrication. We increased the threshold from $1,000 to $100,000 to account for inflation since 1931. We took care of some sensitive issues where we often hear local governments complaining we can't afford to build things, especially in rural areas. School construction, hospital seismic retrofits, which are mandated. We removed pre-construction, such as surveyors and inspectors, which aren't construction trades. Removed recent addition, the hauling of trash from a job site. We allow local governments to make their own decisions regarding their prevailing wage policies, should they choose to do so, like charter cities can now. We also tried to define what a public works job was. First, we changed the criteria from project to in the execution of a contract, so that it would be clear that it's a contract that matters, not the project. And you'll hear one thing argued at the legislative level, and then you'll go to a court hearing, and you'll hear the exact opposite said. So we really need some consistency on that. And in fact, if you look at the law, you'll see both contract and project mentioned. We try to make the threshold for prevailing wage consistent with the apprenticeship threshold. Right now it's $1,000 and $30,000. This needs to be consistent so contractors know what they're doing. We made the volunteer exemption permanent on it. We define private construction being construction where less than 50% of the money coming in is coming from a public source. So these are some changes we saw. You see that these do not repeal the prevailing wage, but I think that they are a very good start to taking what is a messy law and making it better.
Thank you. Second witness in support.
Thank you. Julianne Broyles here also on Associated Builders and Contractors of California. I did want to point out that this bill was really introduced to deal with jobs, and that seems to be something that the legislature, the administration, all have said is the most important thing as we move into 2012. And I think that's what we have to keep in focus here, that public work should be available for any worker, regardless of whether they're union or non-union, to work on. And AB 987 is one of those bills that makes that possible. I think the analysis, first of all, I wanted to compliment the consultant on doing a very thorough job of setting out the issues, both in the analysis on 987, 988. And on page 2 of the analysis, they say something exactly of what we're trying to get to here. And it's the very bottom paragraph where it says, it was believed that the government should set an example by paying the wages prevailing in a locality for each occupation. And I think that's a really important point that AB 987 drives home. This will permit the local wages to be really what the prevailing wages for Bakersfield or Los Angeles or San Diego or Eureka. Instead of having, say, in the iron workers instance, one wage that is set for the entire state because there's only one union representing iron workers throughout the entire state. It permits it to be a local determination. And I think that's something that really the committee should consider as it's looking at this issue. So for those reasons, we certainly would ask you to consider this issue and the other issues that we'll raise today on the bill.
Okay, so organizations in support.
Good afternoon. Steve Margaroni. I'm one of the partners at Somas. We're an engineering consulting firm in the western United States with about 80% of our business in the state of California. One of the topics that was mentioned earlier is the payment of prevailing wage to construction inspectors. That's one of the business units that we're in. What has occurred with prevailing wage for inspectors is an inequity in our workforce now, and I'll give you a real-world example. We're required to pay a package to our construction inspectors of $60 an hour. Again, that's all Northern California without specifics to any region. What that's created is that's about equivalent to what we pay our licensed resident engineers as well, which the inspectors work for. So that's created inequity in the workforce that we have to deal with in other ways. And it's also increased project delivery costs in an economy where there's continued downward pressure on cost. And, with this, it's certainly not creating jobs. It's actually taking them away for how we have to manage our business. We were a firm of 1,000 people in 2007, and we're currently about 450 people today.
Okay, yes, and support.
Happy New Year, Mr. Chairman. Richard Markuson, representing the Western Electrical Contractors Association and the Plumbing, Heating, Cooling Contractors of California. And it's really unfortunate that contractors have to present this legislation, and unfortunately we don't have public agencies and others here, taxpayers, who are the ultimate beneficiaries of these changes. And the reason that I say that is, in California, from my perspective, the prevailing wage is really a cheat. And the reason that I say that it's a cheat is because it's very simple to come to the legislature and say, you know what, this project should be done at a prevailing wage. But there's never a discussion about what the prevailing wage is and the changes that occur over time. So one of the things that I did, and prevailing wages are not set in any kind of a less than a ministerial action. There is a person sitting in a cubicle in San Francisco that looks at collective bargaining agreements and sets it without any regulatory overview of those wage rates, and that becomes the rate set twice a year. The reason that I call it a cheat is I went back and looked at average construction wages and the CPI and prevailing rates for electricians over the last 5 years. The CPI went up about 12% over the last 5 years. Average construction wages only went up 10%. Prevailing wages for electricians went up 22%. Right now in San Francisco, the full package for an electrician is $76 an hour. Those of you who are involved in education, my wife is a teacher with a master's degree and 2 years of postgraduate study, makes about $42 an hour. Now, I'm not saying that she should be paid $76 or electricians should be paid
That'd be a good idea, though.
$42 an hour. Yeah, I would love it if she was paid $76 an hour. But what I'm saying is that it is so simple for the legislature to say, yeah, let's make this a prevailing wage job, and I don't think it's ever really seriously considered what the impacts are or the priorities that we're setting with our wages. The Sacramento Bee today talked about an additional $1 billion of cuts to K-12 education because of the Tier 2 anticipated cuts. The state of California has lost thousands of teachers over the last 5 years because of reductions. And at the same time, we're paying $76 an hour for an electrician on a public works job.
Okay.
We support the bill. It makes good sense. It makes good sense for contractors, but it makes better sense for public agencies and for the taxpayers of California. Thank you.
All right, well, thank you very much. Statements in opposition.
Happy New Year, Mr. Chairman, members.
Same.
First, I'd like to thank also the committee consultant, did a very thorough job on the analysis. We're very strongly opposed to these two pieces of legislation. I know they talked about clarifying, cleaning up language. Well, the building trades and the affiliates for a long time have supported prevailing wage, have won significant regulatory, legislative battles to actually preserve it and improve upon that. So I guess we should be thankful that the ABC, who routinely opposes prevailing wage, is here to do us a favor in cleaning up the statute. They talk about jobs and that basically this is a jobs-creating bill package. Well, it is not. Jobs for who? And what types of jobs are we talking about? We're talking about middle-class jobs that the prevailing wage has helped create and establish because it's been so successful, because when the New Deal occurred, other states enacted their many prevailing wage Davis-Bacon Acts. They saw the actual value in protecting construction workers. Construction work is temporary, it's seasonal. They have to be paid a certain wage in order to maintain during those rough months when there is no work available. There's pension so that we don't have to depend on the public system. There's health care included in this. There's a partnership with the actual employers and contractors that has worked effectively. It provides training opportunities. It helps people in minority settings that have disadvantaged communities to come into the building trades and actually access a middle-class opportunity for a career. Essentially, that's what these bills are. You have health and safety that will be impacted by the dismantling of prevailing wage. They talk about some of the assessments and how to look at if they're paying Bakersfield, San Francisco wages. That makes no sense. To extract the collective bargaining agreements from actually being able to provide input to the Department of Industrial Relations is a step backwards. How are they going to determine those wages then? Are they going to send thousands upon thousands of surveys every 6 months, costing the state millions of dollars just to reduce the wages? And should we trust the contractors to pay actual fair wage? We don't believe that's necessary. We think that the prevailing wage law has been effective. It has produced a highly skilled workforce, second to none in the entire world. It has brought us the California infrastructure that we have now. And it comes at the worst possible time to try to reduce workers' wages. We're seeing people commit suicides, lose their homes, cause divorces. The construction industry saw the first the brunt of basically the brunt of the economic recession first, and we're going to be the last ones to get out. So this bill and this package of bills preys upon that and wants to exploit jobs so they can pay people minimum wage salaries And what do we get in the end? We get shoddy construction work. We have a race to the bottom. We lose apprenticeship. We lose the pension systems that our members are depending upon for their retirement. It's just an ill-conceived proposal we strongly oppose. Thank you.
Statement in support.
Mr. Chair, members, Eduardo Martinez.
In opposition. In opposition.
Yeah, Eduardo Martinez on behalf of the California State Pipe Trades Council, the Coalition of California Utility Employees, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, and the Western States Council of Sheet Metal Workers. I would echo what my colleague Cesar just said. In addition, we believe that this bill is not about streamlining or making clarifying certain areas of the law. We feel like this is an intentional attack on hard-fought victories that men and women have fought in this building and in other state agencies. We believe the legislature did think through some of the actions that this bill is now proposing to undo with respect to making sure that workers are paid prevailing wages and that contractors can't skirt those through technicalities or moving the work off the workplace or what have you. So we strongly oppose.
Yeah. In opposition.
Mr. Chair, members, Sarah Flox, the California Labor Federation, in opposition to this bill package. One of the supporters mentioned jobs in connection to this bill, as well as the public sector. As you know, the Labor Federation represents building trades, the private sector, and the public sector. And we oppose any bill that would undermine the integrity of the prevailing wage, because of the prevailing wage, which puts money into our economy and saves the state money. There was a recent study by a Colorado State University professor, an economist, who looked at the prevailing wage, projects that had the prevailing wage and not the prevailing wage in San Jose. Over 5 years, he found that the prevailing wage pumped $164 million into the economy of San Jose, created 1,500 jobs, and resulted in $1.9 million in tax revenue for local government because of the prevailing wage. This is something that the state at this point cannot afford to get rid of or to undermine or to weaken in any way. A decrease in wages for construction workers because of changes to the prevailing wage will result in losses for the state in tax revenue, losses to local communities, and a possibility of indirect costs due to higher injuries on the job because there's lower paid, less skilled workers, and an overall dragging down of the industry. The prevailing wage is designed to level the playing field for signatory contractors. We don't want to see the creation of an underground economy and a race to the bottom because signatory contractors are forced to compete with people who are paying below the prevailing wage. For those reasons, we oppose this bill. Thank you.
In opposition.
In opposition, Mr. Chairman. Tim Kremens, Operating Engineers, in opposition. First of all, prevailing wage in general we think is good public policy. It's a reflection of labor management relations, reaching an agreement, and prevailing wage is an attempt to preserve that. The construction industry is very, very unique, unlike any other industry in the state, in that there's a huge infusion of public dollars. Probably the bulk of construction dollars nowadays is predominantly public dollars. For instance, if you do a large project in Miss Grove's district in Bakersfield, you could have more public dollars than private dollars. You put in wages in that district, it could totally upset the economics of the construction industry in there just by the large infusion of public dollars. And again, prevailing wage is an attempt to preserve that balance of labor and management sitting down and reaching an agreement. We think prevailing wage is an attempt to preserve that agreement between labor and management. Our employers both do prevailing wage work, public work, and private work. They're able to compete on private work paying our wages, paying what is termed prevailing wages. There's a way to compete under that. Also, on the issue of surveys, the surveys are not done statewide. They are done on a county-by-county basis for each craft. And we don't participate in the surveys. The employer does. Surveys are contractors are sent survey questionnaires asking what they pay in wages. We don't. And the Department of Industrial Relations and its labor statistics units compiles that data and establishes the prevailing wage from that. That is how the prevailing wage is done. And again, I think if you upset prevailing wage, you upset labor management relations, you upset health and welfare programs agreed to be paid for by management and training programs.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Shane Gussman on behalf of the California Teamsters Public Affairs Council, also opposed to the bill. We agree with a lot of the things that the previous opponents have said. For us, it just boils down to this. are we still going to have middle-class jobs here in California? And this bill, all it does is take money out of the hands of workers and put it into the hands of others. We're opposed to the bill.
Statements in opposition.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Chris Walker on behalf of the California Association of Sheet Metal Air Conditioning Contractors. I'm here on behalf of 600 contractors statewide who strongly support prevailing wage laws and the middle-class jobs they provide and are very much opposed to this bill package.
Thank you. And
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Lee Sandall with the International Longshore and Warehouse Association, and we sympathize with our fellow workers in the construction trade industry, and we do understand that they were the first to feel the brunt of this recession, and they will be the last to benefit from it. We oppose this legislation.
Great. Thank you. Any other statements in opposition? Hearing any questions by the committee? Yes, Mr. Morrell.
Thank you. How are you? I have a question to ask to any of the gentlemen over there. The concern I have is due to inflations and that kind of thing, these wages seem like we're just going to be shifting one set of funds to another job since they're going to be paying more. And so we're going to be giving one worker a job, but then we're going to have another worker not being able to work because those wages are going to be pretty high. And in light of the way free markets are supposed to work, help me reconcile why you believe what you believe, if you would.
Absolutely. It's about the quality and the training of the actual craftsmanship that is accomplished on the work. When you have taxpayer dollars paying for a certain project, you don't want any mistakes. You don't want to be accidents, delays. Any type of incidents in that way can actually increase the cost and the cost to the taxpayer. If you have a trained person, skilled person, it should be paid the proper wage and a fair wage to make sure that that work is accomplished, has quality, makes better sense, increases safety. That's what the prevailing wage is all about.
The only thing
if you look at splitting wages, then what you have less skilled, less productivity, and it will increase the cost of your actual project.
But since this is going to be at the local level, instead of the state handling this, the bill where it gives discretion to each cities, don't you think the cities, the mayors and the city managers and the planning department, building department are just as smart as maybe people up here, and they can choose who they feel are the best people for that job? Because what you just said sounds nice, but that doesn't always hold true. A person making this much does better than making that much. I haven't seen that in my own personal life, and I'm in the real estate building business. So.
Well, I like to say is I strongly disagree with your statement. I think that it's essential to protect the integrity of the infrastructure, and one way of doing that is to ensure people are paid fair wages. Everyone's involved in infrastructure financing, every single taxpayer. And one city, as opposed to a region and so forth, it all impacts each other. You don't have a freeway that just runs from one end of the city to the next. You have an infrastructure system. That's what essentially is important. You can't just separate one of these two things.
Okay. Any other questions, Mr. Lynn?
Comments.
Yes. Okay. Comments. Would you like to close? And
Mr. Leaho can comment, if that's okay with you. It's up to you, Mr. Chair. It's your committee.
Would you like to close?
I'll close.
Then we'll hear from the.
You know, I think there's a huge misunderstanding, especially with the opponents of the bill. This is not a repeal of prevailing wage. It's just to determine what is right for local communities and local governments to be able to establish a local rate. You can buy a 4,000 square foot house in Bakersfield for roughly $250,000, but that in San Francisco or another area in Los Angeles would cost you in Ventura 4 or 5 times that amount. It's just establishing a local wage that's a prevailing wage determined by the local governments and the local communities, your mayors, like Mr. Morrell says, or your local supervisors. One of the things that was implemented or talked about in this bill was the off-site construction. We have in our community in Bakersfield, we have 2 large off-site construction or manufacturing facilities, fabrication facilities, that are looking at building facilities in North Dakota for manufacturing and fabrication, because they do build oil field and machinery off-site and then take it to the site in the oil fields. They pay really good wages. I mean, it's not $70 an hour, but in Bakersfield, $35 an hour is an excellent wage. And what they're doing is they're building a facility outside in North Dakota because it's cheaper to transport equipment they found, build it in North Dakota, haul it all the way across the United States on a flatbed truck, and set it up in the facilities in which they need here. I have another client of mine in the private industry that's a private business, not a government business, wanted to expand his yard and create a shade and a nice place for his employees to have picnic areas outside. In order to do that and get permitted by the city, he had to do curb and gutter, aligned trees, mediums, and all that stuff, which brought in some part of city payment for him to do some of that development, which made his whole project on his private property prevailing wage because of the all or encompassing part of this bill, or the language that's in that we're trying to take away. He chose not to do the project because he didn't want to do the whole and prevailing wage. Now, and Mr. Diaz, when he was speaking, talked about how we're going to just pay minimum wage. This bill says nothing about paying minimum wage. I don't think you could get a skilled worker to work for minimum wage. I think between the worker and the city or the government, they choose that wage, but it's in their locality. And that's all this bill says.
Okay. Thank you for your close, Mr.
I would ask for your aye vote.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Mr. Chairman, and to the author, I couldn't disagree with you more on some of the comments or characterizations of your bill, because you say it's not a repeal, but it's truly a total gutting of the long-established prevailing wage law. You could then call it a decimation of prevailing wage law. I mean, prevailing wage law here in California has been around for, last year was 80 years, enacted during the Great Depression as a way to protect the middle class, to protect the depression of wages. And in fact, 18 other states enacted similar laws during that most critical time in our country's history. And today we have 33 other states that have prevailing wage laws. And so I think we're living during a time where we need to make sure we're protecting these middle class jobs, make sure we're maintaining them, not undermining that very important goal. Also, I think the prevailing wage law has ensured fair competition, quality construction, as was stated earlier, and making sure that we're not using government dollars to depress wages of our working families here in our state. And I do believe that those good paying salaries are truly an economic benefit, because those families end up using those dollars to pay their bills. It gets reinvested back into our economy. And I think that's what we've been hearing more and more of, people needing wages that they could live on, that they could provide their families with. As stated earlier, minimum wage can't do that. And these are the types of jobs that we should be protecting and not approving laws that would undermine that critical goal. And I'm not going to support a policy that I believe is a race to the bottom.
Okay. Any other statements by members? Let me just say, I do respect the author and the author's goals of providing business with more opportunity in California. I think that that's a very good goal to have. Matter of fact, I frankly believe that that more jobs, more business opportunity is more the point. And the point is really not prevailing wage. Prevailing wage has served a purpose in our state of making sure that we can maintain a shrinking middle class. And the only way we're going to have any recovery from this economic downturn is that people are going to have to be able to afford their mortgages. They're going to have to be able to send their children to school, and they're going to have to be able to pay their bills. And a fair, negotiated prevailing wage helps contribute toward that. And so I think that it would be counterproductive for us to move in this direction. Also, it's a question of fairness. My son is a laborer. He works in construction. And when he has a job, he works for a fair wage. Between jobs, that fair wage helps sustain him. And so that is the reality of the ebbs and flows of that business. And so it is part of the cost of doing business in the state, and it's a fair cost. And so I won't be supporting the bill today. And I think that I and members of this committee would gladly work probably to the person on how do we get more work in California and how do we, in fact, develop more business opportunities so that we can develop more jobs. So with that,
I'd like to move the bill, Chairman.
okay, the bill's been moved. There's a second. Okay, the bill is moved and is seconded. We'll call a roll.
Motion is due pass to appropriations. Swanson.
Swanson, no.
Swanson, no. Morel.
Yes.
Morel, aye. Alejo.
No.
Alejo, no. Allen. Allen, no. Furutani.
No.
Furutani, no. Beth Gaines. Beth Gaines, aye. Yamada. No. Yamada, no. That bill fails.
Yeah, that bill fails.
Thank you.
Next bill, AB 988.
Thank you. Again, thank you, Mr. Chair and members. AB 988 gives the California Division of Labor Statistics and Research the means to calculate and determine more accurate state-mandated construction wage rates referred to as prevailing wage within various regions of the state. As discussed in my previous bill or proposed bill, California contractors are required to pay prevailing wage rates and workers that engage in various occupations allegedly related to public works constructions. These work rates are based on the modal rate or the most common rate. In a free market, wage rates will vary for individual works based on numerous conditions. And therefore, the state's method of calculating prevailing wage rates is assumed to always result in the common rates set within the union collective bargaining agreements. AB 988 establishes a business-friendly policy for more accurately calculated prevailing wage rates. It's a gross misuse of taxpayer dollars to expect that the same wage rates in urban coastal areas apply in rural inland areas. Along with this, AB 988 restores personal privacy rights to the construction workers. In 2001, union-affiliated private organizers were allowed to obtain addresses of individual employees from payroll records, private payroll records that are possessed by the government. This is an infringement on basic rights to privacy and protection from intimidation should be removed from the statute. Chair and members, the California economic climate is in terrible shape with businesses leaving every day. When we in the legislature must change how government determines wage rates on construction projects. By artificially inflating construction wage rates, the state discourages the construction or revitalization of commercial and industrial developments and gives taxpayers 4 schools for the price of 5. We owe the hardworking citizens of California nothing less than spending their tax dollars more efficiently and more wisely. If you look at a map of the state of California and it's shaded based on the degree of disparity between prevailing wage rates and actual market rates, you'll see that the disparity rates increases the further one is from the Division of Labor Statistics and Research headquarters in San Francisco. This suggests to me that the prevailing wages are set so that construction workers from San Francisco can travel for projects throughout the state with minimal need to adjust to the local markets. If we're going to accept the idea that government should set the wage rates for construction workers under certain conditions, then the state needs to make it a reasonable effort to ensure that those government mandated rates approximate with the actual rates that are in the regional market. The current method of calculating prevailing wage rates inflates the cost of construction and discourages economic job growth and job creation in most areas of the states. Let's correct that problem by calculating prevailing wage in a way that would make wage rates accurate with the locality.
Okay, and this bill is similar in some respects, and so we're going to limit 2 principal witnesses to 2, and then statements in support on each side. So, first witness.
Sure, thank you. As AB 987 dealt with the coverage for prevailing wage, 988 deals with the calculation of prevailing wage. I first want to mention a couple things. In both of these bills, virtually none of the changes relate to the original 1931 bill that was passed. Actually, most of the provisions that are addressed here are ones that were dealt with or added during the Gray Davis administration. One of those, for example, in this particular bill is AB 988 repeals a section that adds the other component to prevailing wage determinations. This was a bill, Senate Bill 868, that was a gut amend. It was gutted one day, brought up before one committee the next day. I actually have a copy of the transcript. It's laughable. Nobody even knew what they were talking about on the bill. It was just thrown together at the last minute and sailed through at the very tail end of 2003. And today, many groups, including even unionized construction employers, are confused exactly about what the other means and how it's calculated. And that brings up the issue of how prevailing wage is calculated. Most Californians would think, oh, so, they want to find out what the prevailing wage is for laborers in Bakersfield, so they survey contractors and find out what they're paying in Bakersfield. Well, actually, that doesn't work at all. Go that way at all. Very few surveys are done by the state to determine prevailing wage. In fact, in 1997, when there was money put in the budget by the Wilson administration to do surveys, it was cut out. The only recent surveys I know of that have been done by the state was they did one to set a new prevailing wage for off-the-site hauling to and from a job site. They also did a survey to find out if it was sheet metal workers or roofers that did the majority of metal roof installation, so they could figure out what collective bargaining agreement to use to determine that prevailing wage, the sheet metal workers or the roofers. They actually found that carpenters were in control of that trade in one particular area of the state, interesting enough. But you'll see here some of the problems when you don't do surveys and you just say, well, let's look at the collective bargaining agreement. What is the job jurisdiction there? Okay, then we're just going to use this collective bargaining agreement. First of all, if a collective bargaining agreement takes in a large area or even the whole state or that whole large area gets the same wage rate unless there is a provision within that collective bargaining agreement to have regional differences. And this is where you have situations where a San Francisco wage rate becomes the same as a Bakersfield wage rate. Secondly, how do they determine prevailing wages? They go through the collective bargaining agreement, and every single employer payment that's in there, they take it out, they add them all up at the end, and that's your prevailing wage rate. There are things in that have absolutely nothing to do whatsoever with employee compensation. That's why we're trying to get rid of that 1773.1A, 7 through 9. Annualization. Added in 2000, nobody really knew what it was about. Big confusion for contractors on how to annualize credits against the prevailing wage determination. Very complicated matter there. We have something that we've always objected to, the inclusion of addresses in the certified payroll records when union-affiliated organizations request them. They get the addresses and then they do house visits and mailers to workers. We think that's a privacy violation. What is the modal rate, the most commonly seen rate? We suggest a weighted average or perhaps a median as a more accurate way to determine what a prevailing wage is. This is the reason why they don't have to do surveys, because the mode is almost always the collective bargaining rate, because that's the most common rate you'll see in an area. Finally, we deal with state holidays. We think that prevailing wage should apply holiday rates to actual holidays that are recognized by the state rather than anything that's just thrown into a collective bargaining agreement. Once again, it's just a matter of common sense and trying to be accurate so that you don't discourage a construction job in a place like Bakersfield because, the wage rates are just out of line with what it really is there in the local market. Thank you.
Thank you. And the second witness.
Mr. Chairman, Richard Markison, I'll stipulate to my previous testimony, but I would encourage you to support this measure. Do something right for the taxpayers. As the author noted, right now school districts are buying 4 schools for the price of 5. We can't afford to continue to do that. Let's make some prudent changes. Let's continue to require apprentices. Let's continue to demand that contractors do quality work, but let's make some changes that make sense for the taxpayers of California.
Thank you. Report.
Thank you, sir. Julie Ann Broyles here on behalf of Associated Builders and Contractors of California, the sponsor of the bill, asked for an aye vote. We have gone through an economic reset. We think there is a new normal that needs to be reached and would ask for your aye vote.
Okay. In opposition?
Chairman, member Cesar Diaz on behalf of the State Building and Construction Trades Council, also strongly opposed. First of all, the prevailing wage rates are set county by county, so the influence about statewide prevailing wage rate is completely false. There was a study recently by the University of Utah professor about some states that had repealed or had diminished their prevailing wage laws. They came back now with triple cost overruns on public school projects, a 15% increase in construction injuries, a 40% decline in apprenticeship training, and all this was supposedly to just save 1.5% in wages for workers. It's taking money from workers, giving it to contractors and developers is essentially what these proposals are doing. And the state does not have the capacity to go out and perform thousands and thousands of surveys, and to essentially take out collective bargaining agreements is unfair. It's a direct attack on working people and unions, and we strongly urge your no vote.
In opposition.
Mr. Chair, members, Eduardo Martinez on behalf of the California State Pipe Trades Council, the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, the Western States Council of Sheet Metal Workers, and the Coalition of California Utility Employees. I'll just echo the comments of Cesar in opposition.
Yes,
Mr. Chair, Sarah Flox from the California Labor Federation. We are also in opposition to this bill.
yes.
Tim Kremens, Operating Engineers in opposition. If I may clarify real quickly, Mr. Chairman. Again, I'd emphasize surveys are done on a local level. Also, the issue of releasing workers' names and addresses, I think that's a confusion with enforcement. Surveys are, again, only contractors are surveyed. They do not give workers' names. It's the numbers of workers they pay at a certain wage. I think there is some confusion on enforcement on certified payroll when someone goes to enforce and see if there's a violation of payroll. Again, there's no workers' names involved at all doing surveys. On the issue of cost, it was said that we're getting one school for free, 20%, basically 20%. I think the gentleman said we're paying one school for every 4 because of prevailing wage costs. Generally, the construction costs in the industry, wages for the total overall cost of our projects are 18 to 20%. So if prevailing wages were double, you'd save 10%.
Okay, organization and position.
Mr. Chair, members, Chris Walker, again, on behalf of the California Association of Sheet Metal Air Conditioning Contractors, 600 contractors statewide opposed to this bill.
Thank you.
Shane Gutzman on behalf of the Teamsters opposed.
Thank you.
Lee Sandel on behalf of the International Longshore and Warehouse Union's Northern California District Council opposed.
Thank you very much. Any questions by members of the committee? Okay, yes, Mr. Allen.
Yeah, just out of curiosity for the proponents of the measure, how much discussion and negotiation went on between your group and organized labor? Because I hear you guys talking past one another. Did you guys talk at all? Or have you ever tried to actually sit down and... Because I hear both sides saying they want more jobs in California. There's a big disagreement about how and whether they're quality jobs. But I'm just curious. Because I think sometimes when we come to committees, it's kind of like trench warfare. You guys have your position, proponents, opponents, depends on the issue. But I was just wondering how much discussion has occurred between your groups over the last 12 months or the years regarding these issues, just out of curiosity.
We've been historically at battle since Associated Builders and Contractors is founded in 1950. I do think there's actually some common ground. I think that both the union side and our side would recognize this statute is just, it's pieced together over 80 years. And you know what? There's a lot of inconsistency in it. And some of these things need to be addressed. I think that even the people who aren't supporting this bill or opposing this bill might say, you know what, I think that some of the things in this bill deserve a closer look. Maybe not all of them, but some of them I'm a little concerned about. What happens here is when you're in a rural area, those are the areas that tend to be affected more by this. I mean, if you have a school being built in San Francisco, your variation between what the wages, prevailing wages, and what the market is will be minimal. But you get out into Modoc County or a place like that, and because you have these regional collective bargaining agreement areas, it becomes a problem there. And that's one of the reasons why we thought maybe local governments should have some greater authority over it. So the system is definitely flawed.
All right, Ms. Yamada.
Yes, well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I didn't make any comment on Ms. Grove's first bill, but, I did just want to echo a little bit of what I think Mr. Allen's getting to, and that is, over time and when a public policy is put together, after winning a series of either legislative or court battles, it is useful sometimes for parties to get together, even if maybe they don't really see that there's a reason to get together, to review in a holistic way what the original intent of the legislation was or the policy was, and then look at it in the 21st century context. However, I think your bills, in my opinion, go too far in a direction that I can't support. There are other statements made, I think, by Mr. Morrell, about free market. I have concerns about free market forces, particularly when you're considering the best use of taxpayers' dollars. And I think we have to have some clear, unambiguous, and certain standards that we know that all taxpayers, because we're all taxpayers in this room if we're fortunate enough to have jobs. So I don't like to see, what I am feeling that the two sides just, pitting one against the other, because we're all losers when taxpayer dollars are not monitored correctly or used correctly. So, I'm not able to support your legislation today, but I think what I'm hearing a little bit from Mr. Allen is that, sometimes these conversations take a while. And coming from a district that is largely rural now and now hoping to represent an area that is increasingly rural, I know that there's always an urban-rural context that has to be addressed. So I think those are things that we should talk about. But, I just end my comments here with a statement made by a Republican colleague of mine in Yolo County about, what is the true cost of a project. And it's on we served as supervisors together in Yolo County. On his wall it says, if you think a professional is expensive, what do you think the cost of an amateur might be? So, I think that there's always a balance that we need to have certain standards for public works projects, for private projects. We're all using these same spaces and these same structures. And I think these kind of false dichotomies don't serve us very well going into the new year. So for those reasons, I was unable to support your previous legislation. I will not be able to support this either, right. But look forward to additional conversations.
Mr. Fruitani.
Thank you, Chairman, and Happy New Year to everyone. It's nice to be back in Sacramento and dealing with these issues. I really want to thank Mike for his comments, Mr. Allen, about this issue of we come to particularly Labor Committee and it's clearly two sides, everything. I mean, if we didn't pull the minimum wage bill, there would have been two sides out here. We would have had this trench warfare as you described it. I would hope that this year we would start trying to find how we're going to solve these problems of the economy in general in a broader context. I'm afraid that the comment that our one witness said is a reflection of a lot that's being discussed these days. It's called the new normal. And the new normal is much, much lower. That's what everybody's talking about. The problem, though, is in the context of looking at what normal is, I think as crazy as some of this occupy this and occupy that has been, the statements, though, coming out about looking at the issue of how normal is it to have the kind of profits that some of these companies are making in our society while we're dealing with trying to make workers accept less. How normal is that? Do they have a new normal? Do they have a new normal of acceptance? I think the smaller businesses do, but the bigger ones don't. I mean, we have this really weird dichotomy in Los Angeles where, and I don't begrudge him how much he makes, but we have a new baseball player for the Angels. He makes $25 million a year for 10 years. And we just started the NBA up, and I don't begrudge any of them. I enjoy the games. I don't plan to go to any of them because it's too expensive. But we're talking about these things, and it's just like this crazy, weird Alice in Wonderland where we're talking about what's normal. Is that normal to pay someone to hit a ball $25 million a year for 10 years? Is it normal to accept a worker to take less so that we can hire more? I got a feeling if we pay people less, it doesn't mean we're going to hire more workers. We're just going to pay them less. They're going to be asked to do the same work, if not more, and the people are going to be more concerned on the profit end. And I understand the need for profit and capital. I don't begrudge companies for having that. But this normal's got to be something that we're all dealing with and going down. I'm not about lowering the tide for all boats. I'm about raising it for all. And so how do we do that becomes the question. You know, people making profit in business, great. good business environment and good business is critical if we want good jobs that pay benefits and pensions and those kind of things that workers should have. It goes hand in hand, but when we come to this committee, I think it's a great description, Mike. It's trench warfare. We know how we're going to vote. They know how they're going to vote. You know what I mean, it's sort of weird to me the first day of this committee to take on such a huge issue. I mean, staff, and we looked at the bills and prepared for them, but it's the first day I'd like to have maybe had a hearing on it, or you're not talking about, Ms. Grove, I think you're just a very ambitious bill to look at changing a paradigm, not just making some streamlining, a little this and a little that.
With all due respect, I don't set the hearing schedule.
Well, I would love to have had more discussion.
I was skiing, and I got a notice. Your bill's up at this day.
No,
I said, oh, okay.
I know. All I'm saying is I would have preferred some discussion. I'm not blaming it on you. I'm just saying this was a big piece that you're putting on the table for the first committee meeting and to have a vote. Not enough time to discuss it really and look at it and have interaction. So we're just going to vote the way we always vote.
Thank you.
Yeah, you know, Assemblyman Furutani, there are some things we can go back on. There are basic economic fundamentals and principles that if we could agree with them, they actually work. You can't spend beyond your means. Any of us here went to a financial planner and they said, here's how to get out of debt, go create more debt and leverage yourself, you would run. You know, the same thing holds true with states and nations. There are fundamental principles we don't agree on, but we should be able to because they actually work. And, you know, I think about that. You know, there was one president just a few years ago when he became president, lowered the tax rate from 70% to 28% and created 21 million jobs in the private sector. If you go back to Warren Harding, he dropped the tax rate from 60% from his predecessor to 20%, and it created a 2.6% misery index, the lowest on record. But, you know, not just here, but I think about other states. I was watching the Iowa caucuses where their unemployment is 5.6%. Colorado, Texas, all free market states that everybody's prospering right now because less regulation, free markets. In Texas, you laugh at this, there's 50 states in America. Texas created 37% of those jobs. People are getting wealthy. They're leaving California with great weather to go to places where they have insects and a lot of hot, humid, crappy weather, man. And it's flat there. There are no mountains, you know. And so I think we can look at that. We can look at Singapore. We can look at Vietnam. Just a few years ago, they were communists. And
well,
yeah, I know we got to go on, but the thing is, you look at one of us talk before you guys talk. You want facts. Those are facts.
Well, let me give you some others. My financial planner tells me if I can't reach my nut, I can't pay my bills. There's one thing you can do. You can cut. There's another thing you can do is make more money.
Yeah, exactly.
All right.
You know, you can have, and if you're going to announce
taxpayers back,
if you're going to announce your candidacy for the Republican Party presidential position,
I know you guys don't want me to put my gavel down first day. Somebody's going to raise Newt in a minute here. Let's just. All right. So, Mr. Lael, did you have a? Okay. Well, first of all, let me just say this. There's something that's getting lost in this debate. First of all, you need to know that this committee has never refused to be intermediaries in discussions over complex issues. You know, this is a 2-year bill. We were prepared to be intermediaries last year. We're always prepared to be intermediaries in discussions if there is an objective that two sides can sit down and have discussions. We've always made that offer. I think it's no secret that we all know that California prospers when people work. When business does business in the state, that's important to us. But what we can't lose in this whole debate, and here we're talking about calculations, is that the other partners in this whole discussion are the workers. They also are equal partners. They're not just pawns. They're equal partners. The ability for the workers to have a fair rate of pay and to participate, and for that fair rate of pay to have any integrity at all, you have to have a mechanism to get there, and that's what this provides. a mechanism so that there's some integrity in that question of fair wages for a fair day's work. And so that's very important to keep in mind. It's not, work them for the smallest amount of money possible and get as much as you can out of them. It is the economics of that. And I believe that that will be successful for workers and successful for businesses. And so prevailing wage has served that purpose. You may be able to come up with a better negotiated arrangement between the industry and labor. You guys should do that. You need our help. It's something that can be talked about. But I will tell you, this is what we have now, and it's been providing that integrity for a fair wage. And we've been losing the middle class in California. It's been cut in half. And so how do we stop this spiral down? And that means that workers are going to have to receive fair wages for the work that they do, and businesses are going to have to recognize that there's a cost of doing business, and then we have to be encouraged to try to make sure that there's more and more opportunities for jobs. So with that, the bill's been moved. Is there a second? And it's been properly seconded. I don't think you closed. Will you please?
Is that okay if I close?
Yes, we want you to close.
I appreciate the committee's offer to help negotiate information on this bill or the bills that I've proposed, and I'd be glad to take Mr. Diaz and others up on their offer to work with me, and we'll reintroduce together on something that we work with. The only comments that I appreciate that, and if he's truly serious, I'd be glad to work with him, and I'd appreciate the committee's help to work with that. I do want to say a few things that were said. As I listen to all of you talk, and it seems to me that there is a perception, especially on this side of the dais, that if you're not signatory, you're not safe, you're not qualified, and you don't pay a decent wage. And that is truly a misconception. I have been a longstanding and actually former board member of Associated Builders and Contractors in the Bakersfield area before I became a legislator. And there are thousands of contractors that pay very good wages, excellent benefits, have a phenomenal safety records with mod rates below 60%. And there are also signatory companies or union companies that meet that same information that I just provided to you. But there is also, union companies, just because you're signatory doesn't mean that you're ultimately safe, you're ultimately most skilled, you're ultimately... So I think there's just a huge misconception of the way that I see it in the business world, because I do operate with businesses in the private community that pay excellent wages, pay excellent benefits. People thrive. They own homes. They own boats. And they're not signatory companies. So to have the mindset that if you're not a signatory company, then you're automatically not qualified and that you don't pay a decent wage or that you pay or work people to death, absolutely not. I don't think anybody or any employer, especially the ones that I deal with in the private sector, have that mentality whatsoever. So I would like that misconception cleared up on these bills, and that was not the intent of the bills, to make it sound like we were just going to pay minimum wage. That's incorrect and not right. So in closing, I'd like to ask for your aye vote.
Well, thank you very much for that. We appreciate those comments. With that, we're going to call the roll.
Swanson?
Swanson, no.
Swanson, no. Morell?
Aye.
Morell, aye. Alejo? No. Alejo, no. Allen? No. Allen, no. Furutani?
No.
Furutani, no. Beth Gaines? Aye. Beth Gaines, aye. Yamada? Yamada, no. That bill fails 2-5.
Okay, thank you. That bill fails.
I just wanted to announce, Mr. Chairman, that my bill 196, just for those who may be watching, on minimum wage has been postponed, and we introduced a new bill, 1439 today. So we look forward to having that hearing at a future hearing date in this committee. Thank you.
No problem.
Are we done?
Okay. I think that concludes the business for the day.
Can we get a group hug? Only kidding.
Yeah, we can have a group hug, and you and I can talk about Iowa.